Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari 8-bit games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the former, although it's not one I spent a huge amount of time with as a kid, because I wasn't actually a huge fan of it back then, partly because it was a game that we had on cassette, which meant it took ages to load, but also because I didn't really get on with it. But, you know, I'm willing to give it another go. So the game in question is Baja Buggies by a sports game company called GameStar. This was run by a guy called Dan Ugrin. It was an early example of a racing game that didn't follow the standard arcade mold, so it didn't use the checkpoints and timer method that we saw in games like Pole Position at the time. So all you had to do in the game was survive until you were too damaged to continue. And we'll see how that works in a moment. It began its life as a night rally game, which was sort of loosely based on the Night Driver game that was on the Atari 2600, although there's no actual relation between the two. And it subsequently developed into Baja Buggies, which was entirely set in the daytime in the desert. One interesting thing about this game is that the final version includes 2 fixed courses and then 1 completely randomized course, which is pretty cool. So, anyway, let's take a look at how it plays. Right, so here we go with Baja Buggies, a racing game by GameStar for Atari 8-bit. Now, we have a few different options we can choose from here. So if you press select, you can choose between course 1 and course 2, or the random course. Pressing the option key will choose between amateur and pro mode. And you hit the start key to begin the race. So, just for the sake of starting things off nice and easily, let's start with course 1 on amateur mode and see how we get on. Alright, so this is a little bit different from a lot of racing games of the era in that, well, there's quite a few ways it's different actually. First of all, you have a speedometer, which is quite an exciting development. And secondly, it's not about beating a time limit, but rather it's about beating your opponents. So there are 80 opponents ahead of you in the field, and you have to pass all of them. Well, not all of them. We'll come on to that in a moment. You have to pass as many of them as you can before your buggy gets destroyed. And your buggy will take damage either by hitting the other buggies on the road or by going off the side of the road. So, and you'll see that hitting something in this, unlike in something like, say, Pole Position, just results in a loss of speed. It doesn't even bring you to a complete stop. It just slows you down quite a lot. So it's a bit more forgiving than a lot of games. Although one aspect that is a little bit tricky in this game is that you don't have any indication of how damaged you are on screen. You just have to get a feel for that. Because after a certain number of hits or times going off the side of the road, it will just be game over. Now, talking about the position, you'll notice that every time I overtake a buggy, the counter in the bottom right corner of the screen will go down by 1. That's my current position in the race out of 80. And there's also that radar screen at the bottom there. So the jiggling red dot is me. And the white line are the leaders of the pack. So the right-hand side of that white line will be first place. And the left-hand side of that white line is just the beginning of the frontrunners. I'm not sure exactly what place that is. Whether it's top 5, top 10 or something like that. But basically your aim, besides not wrecking yourself, is to reach at the very least the left-hand side of that white line before the end of the race. So I don't know if it's actually possible to win the race, actually come in first place, but it's certainly looking like it'll be possible to catch them up. So we're in 10th place now. If you look at the radar, we are gaining on them very slowly. They are still moving though. Should be coming up on them any moment now. So we are going just slightly faster than they are. Now, in amateur mode like we're playing on, there is actually a speed limiter on your buggy. You'll notice the speedometer goes all the way up to 80, but we're currently only doing just under 70. If you play in pro mode, you can go at full speed, which is a mixed blessing, because you can go faster, but it also makes it a bit more difficult to dodge the incoming other buggies. Okay, we're actually overlapping the end of the front runners now, so hopefully we should be seeing some of that front pack any moment. There they are. There we are. So we finished 10th. Not bad at all. Itchier, excuse me. Not bad at all. So, let's take a look at some of the other modes, just so we get a feel for the differences between amateur and pro mode. Let's stick on course 1 again, because that's nice and easy. And we'll just see what difference pro mode makes. So, from the beginning again, you build up your speed. You actually accelerate automatically in this, so you don't have to push any direction to accelerate. You just build up speed automatically. You can, however, brake by pressing the fire button. And especially on pro mode, where you're moving a lot more quickly, you'll need to do that. Because those other buggies will come up on you quite quickly at times. And you'll also notice on this mode that they're packed a little bit closer together. They're moving a little bit faster as well, so if you lose a lot of speed, you'll actually find some of them coming up behind you and maybe even overtaking you again. So that was quite an interesting aspect of this game. It sort of set it a little bit apart from those games where other racers were just obstacles. I mean, they're basically just obstacles in this as well, because they don't really show any sort of intelligence. They don't really move, except sort of forwards. So they're not actually moving to block you or anything specifically. They're just in the way. But the fact that they can come up behind you and overtake you like that blue one did there, that set this apart from a lot of other races of the day. And as the arcade racer genre started to evolve, it kind of built on that idea a bit. There's some other games that make good use of that. One we will probably come on to at some point is Activision's titled The Great American Cross Country Road Race, which in which sort of moving faster than the traffic and traffic overtaking you is a very key part of that game. Like I say, I didn't really get on with this game all that well when I was a kid. I'm not entirely sure why, thinking about it, because it is actually pretty fun. I mean, obviously it's very basic, and you're stuck with this brown course. Like the other courses, they don't have different colours or backgrounds or anything. They're all these brown desert courses, but I do quite like the mechanics in this. And then there's little touches that are cool. Like I like the way that the wheels look like they're spinning, and the sound effects, and the fact you've got a speedometer is really cool, and that radar, and yeah, just the way it's a different structure from your average arcade racer of the era just makes it a little bit more interesting. So I think we're probably going to wreck ourselves soon before we reach the front runners. So the thing when you're playing on pro mode is to make sure you brake early enough to be able to get around the cars, especially when you're weaving in between those that are packed quite close together, like those ones there. There we go. Okay, so we broke down on that one, so we weren't able to complete that. We did make it to 19th place though, which is pretty good. Let's have a look at the random course and see how that goes. Let's do that on amateur mode for now, just so we have a little bit more of a chance. You've seen how pro mode works. Before we do that, let's just take a quick look at this scoreboard, which is quite an interesting way of doing things. Rather than doing times or anything like this, it uses your average speed. So if you finish the race, I think you have to finish it on pro mode. If you finish the race, it will then take into account what your average speed was and record that on the high score table, which is quite an interesting way of doing things, but entirely appropriate for this particular implementation of racing. So, random course, amateur level. Off we go. Let's see if we can finish this one. I've mentioned a few previous times on this series about sort of nostalgic, iconic sound effects of the Atari 8-bit. And the engine sound used in this game is very much one that sort of brings back strong memories of playing on the Atari 8-bit when I was a kid. It's a sound that it was quite easy to reproduce using the built-in sound commands in BASIC, for example. But it's one that was used a lot for engine noises like this, particularly in car racing games. So if you've not seen one of those previous videos where I've talked about the Atari sound chip, the way it works is basically there's 4 sound channels, and each sound channel has several parameters that can be adjusted. So you can adjust the pitch of a sound, which in the case of the engine noise in this, it will go in rising pitch to reflect the increasing RPM of the engine. You can add different types of distortion to the sound, and that's how you get the difference between a pure musical tone and a kind of roaring sound like we got for the engine here. And then each of those 4 sound channels can also have their volume set independently. I think there are 16 levels altogether between 0 and 15. And so using those combinations of settings, you could actually produce some really impressive sounds on the Atari 8-bit. And there were some real musical maestros who took full advantage of those settings to be able to produce some really quite astonishing compositions. Obviously in this game we've just got a drone and occasional booms and screeches and that sort of thing. But I mean, these sound effects do the job. They're not overly obnoxious. And as I say, they're very nostalgic sound effects. They are sound effects that I very much associate with playing games in that era. I could hear the sound of this game, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to identify it as being Baja Buggies, but I would certainly recognise it as an Atari 8-bit game over and above anything else. Alright, so we're into that little dry patch again before we reach the frontrunners. We are in 9th this time, which is a little bit better than last time. And we've still got a fair amount of race left to go, so we might be able to get a decent finishing position at this rate. This random course hasn't been super challenging or anything. I mean, ultimately, the way this game is set up, the focus isn't really on the course itself. It's mostly on the dodging of the other buggies and maintaining your speed like that. All the corners do is they just make your buggy drift slightly to one side. And so if you're trying to overtake on a corner, you need to take that into account when you're trying to go past someone. Into 8th and 7th. 6th, 5th, 4th, I reckon. Maybe 3rd, 4th. There we go. Average speed 66.25 miles per hour. Not bad at all. Okay, so that is Baja Buggies. That's pretty much everything there is to show of that game. Oh, we can put our initials in. That's exciting. B? That's not what I pressed. I'm pressing P and you're putting in KKK. There we go. Okay, so the Ku Klux Klan had a average speed of 66.25 miles per hour. I'm really doing badly with initial entering at the minute. If you've seen my recent Centipede video, then you'll know that I had a real disaster there as well. So, but anyway, nothing quite as disastrous as crediting your high score to the KKK. Anyway, on that delightful note, let's leave that there. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue a small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.